So imagine this. Take Pokemon, or any anime like it involving monsters fighting one another with human partners. You replace the animals with demonic children who have magical powers, and instead of it being about catching or raising them like their pets, you and your little demon buddy are locked in an all-out battle royale where there can be only one winner. Fate Stay Night style. If that idea interests you at all, well then allow me to introduce you all to the crazy, wonderful, heartfelt world of Konjiki no Gash. Konjiki no Gash, translated to Golden Gash, and is better known to a lot of you as Zatch Bell, is a manga series that ran on Weekly Shonen Sunday between 2001 to 2007. For compositing purposes, I will be calling the series Gash Bell for the rest of the video. It was written and drawn by Makoto Raiku, and is the story of two young boys, Kiyomaru Takamine, a brilliant but antisocial middle school student with no friends, and Gash Bell, a young boy with amnesia and possessing amazing powers. When Gash literally crashes into Kiyomaru's life at the request of Kiyomaru's father, he begins his attempts at getting Kiyomaru to socialize with his fellow students. But when Kiyomaru finds out about Gash's destructive electric magic, along with a strange red book that allows him to use said powers, the two are pulled into a war involving humans and demons, just like Gash, for the prize of becoming the next Demon King. Despite the action, drama, and ample amounts of comedy, Gash Bell is ultimately a coming-of-age story for both Kiyomaru and Gash. For Kiyomaru, it's about him learning to be sociable again, and to truly rely on the friends he has made both from his high school and his fellow bookkeepers after years of being a shut-in, shunned by his incredibly gifted mind. And for Gash, it's about his journey to rediscover his memories and his desire to become a kind king. One who won't put his people into such a cruel battle for survival, and the struggles he and Kiyomaru face in their journey towards becoming the next king. However, despite being a bestseller in its native Japan and overseas, Gash Bell still remains a cult favorite over here in North America, with very few having actually read it. But those few absolutely loving it, myself included. But why? What makes Gash Bell so special? And why, despite years after its story has been completed, do people still sing its praises? Well, you're about to find out. So why only cover the manga? Gash Bell does have an anime release. Well, unlike my overview of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, where my problems with it as an adaptation come down to a more complicated death of a thousand cuts situation between its story, aesthetics, and filler, this one is a lot easier to explain. It's unfinished. Now, when I mean unfinished, I'm not saying it was cancelled midway through a very important arc. I am literally referring to the fact that the adaptation has never fully adapted the manga. You see, midway through the production of the second major arc in the series, Raiku seriously damaged his hand and could not continue the series for months. This left the anime scrambling to come up with ways to extend the series, and when they literally ran out of filler to make, they had to haphazardly create their own original ending to the series, and by the time Raiku could start working on the manga again, it had been months since the anime originally finished airing. This means that the final arc in Gash Bell, the one that is literally the fight to decide the winner of the battle to determine the next Demon King, has never been adapted. And that's without mentioning the anime's own issues as an adaptation. A lot of modern anime fans, specifically shonen fans, really are spoiled when it comes to their favorite series getting adaptations. Things like inconsistent and poorly drawn animation during important moments, useless padding in what should be brisk and fast scenes, and whole filler episodes designed to ensure that the anime never catches up to the manga weren't the exception, they were the rule. And as an anime, Gash Bell simply does not hold up all too well. But what does hold up is Gash Bell's story and characters, and you won't find a purer experience of that than to read its original manga. Gash Bell is split into 3 major story arcs, and in between them are chapters that are focused on Kiyomaru's school life and set up for the next arc in the series. You would think that going from high-stakes demon battles to an everyday Japanese middle school setting would be jarring and cause you to want to skip them. But Raikou packs in enough comedy and character development in these chapters to make them feel just as worthwhile to read as those major fights. Gash Bell's biggest theme is friendship. I know that's a very common theme that you'll find in a lot of shonen battle mangas, but what I find refreshing is that Gash Bell really sticks to its themes of camaraderie, rather than just lecture to its audience about why having friends is important. Kiyomaru's whole arc is about learning to ask for help and appreciating it. The battle to decide the next Demon King literally requires you and your demon partner to work together, and while at first it seems like teaming up with other bookkeepers is a bad idea, this is actually how most of the cast survived for so long, because of their bonds with each other. Even the villains have to form alliances and work together if they want to stand a chance. Fights aren't just won through brute strength and cunning strategy alone, but also with chemistry with your demon partner, and later your fellow bookkeepers who happen to share the same aspirations as yours. The manga really teaches the merits and value of camaraderie and why they allow our heroes to triumph. It's not just the power of my friends makes me stronger, although that happens a lot as well, but also practical evidence of just how important these bonds are to its characters. Speaking of characters, I might as well go over our 2 leads, Kiyomaru and Gash, right now. Kiyomaru starts the series off as a brilliant but antisocial jerk who has to learn how to be nice and look for help when he needs it. What I really like though is that Raikou knows this is not an overnight procedure. While at the end of the first chapter he does stand up for Gash and Suzume and begins his steps into becoming a kinder person, Kiyomaru in the early chapters is still kind of a prick who still needs to learn how to have more empathy. Of course, he does grow nicer as the series continues, but I really appreciate that Raikou didn't just flip a switch on Kiyomaru's personality from chapter 1 to 2. People don't change overnight, but that's what makes Kiyomaru's gradual transformation into a kind and respectable man that much more satisfying to watch. Gash's growth is also great as well, plus the kid is adorable. When you find out his backstory and the abusive upbringing he was from, you just want to give the poor kid a hug. He's your typical shonen protagonist of being innocent, energetic, and upbeat. But to pair that with the more down-to-earth and cynical Kiyomaru makes for a great contrast between the two. And I think their dynamic is what makes both of them so much fun to watch. On their own, they make decent protagonists, but together, they make for one of my favorite pairs in fiction. Their shared focus also touches upon a very common issue in monster battle series like Gash Bell. How do you divide the development between the creatures and the humans? For series like Pokemon, it can be very inconsistent with who gets the development and focus because of its large and diverse set of characters, and well, because Pokemon can't talk. A series like Digimon has the opposite problem. Its character development is strictly towards the humans, and with some exceptions like Tamers, the Digimon don't nearly get enough focus and development compared to their human partners. Gash Bell finds the happy medium between the two, with Kiyomaru and Gash having equal screen time together, and the two genuinely feeling like a duo together, rather than having a master and pet dynamic that a lot of these series gravitate towards. They also aren't invincible. They suffer a few losses throughout the series, and each one teaches a brutal loss to both to become stronger and steel their resolves to make sure Gash becomes a kind king. But Gash and Kiyomaru aren't the only demon and bookkeeper to have serious development. In fact, one of my favorite aspects about Gash Bell is the wide cast of characters who all share a great deal of focus and development. Whether they be Gash and Kiyomaru's rivals, Sherry Belmont and her demon partner Brago, who briefly become our main characters at the end of the first major story arc, having the much more personal conflict with its main villain and partner, to the glorious, invincible Iron Man Parko Falgor and his partner Kanchome. The two start off as complete jokes, with one of the biggest one-sided fights in the series between them and Kiyomaru and Gash, but gradually not only become much braver, but also stronger, culminating in one of the greatest revelations in the entire series that I dare not spoil. Gash Bell does an excellent job at giving minor and major characters the spotlight when it needs to, showing their own trials and struggles divorced from Kiyomaru and Gash. This might seem off tangent, but while modern shonen fans like to brag about its series having diverse female characters compared to 10 to 20 years ago, here's Gash Bell just quietly having a really good female cast who are all diverse, competent, and have their own agency in the plot. Whether they be the series' secondary protagonists, Tio and Megami, who act as great foils to Gash and Kiyomaru without being generic love interests to them, to Sherry, as I previously mentioned, who at the end of the series starts running around like a real Belmont, kicking demon ass, to just strongly developed characters like Cherish and Ellie. The series is just as focused on having badass guys, just as it's focused on delivering kick-ass girls, which I really appreciate. One of the best parts about Gash Bell is Raiku's ability to wait and allow development to occur organically in his story and between his characters. This allows for the heavy moments in the series to really hit hard, and I feel like this kind of build-up benefits nobody more so than Umagon. Umagon is an adorable tiny little horse who everyone loves. Except Kiyomaru, who shares a bitter rivalry with the little horse. He's a demon like Gash, and seems to be Gash's best friend, judging from how Umagon seems to latch onto him at the start. But Umagon has no partner. Attached to Umagon's back is his book, and for over 50 chapters, Umagon is without a partner, and during this time, we don't get to see him fight at all in the series. What we do see is him trying and failing at finding his human partner, which all end up going wrong for the poor guy. For an average mangaka, this would be the extent of Umagon's character. Just a funny little horse that can't talk and can't find his partner. Comic relief, pretty much. But then, something changes at the start of the first major arc in the series, the Ancient Demon Battle arc. Umagon's book is gone, and instead he carries a letter. The letter is what leads into the events of the arc, but for several dozen chapters, the book disappears without any explanation. That is, until chapter 121. Right in the middle of the Ancient Demons arc, we get an in-depth look at Umagon's process of finding his partner, how he was scared of fighting and was actually relieved when he couldn't find his partner. Until he did. The idea of having to fight other demons for survival terrifies Umagon, and he had to make a difficult choice. Avoid fighting but risk seeing his friends in danger, or make that painful leap into battle and join his friends in combat. The chapter ends with Umagon arriving with his human partner in tow, and the two are unstoppable. Not only is Umagon's human partner Kafka Sunbeam a total Chad who manages to effortlessly combine being both silly and badass at the same time, but look at Umagon! He's gone from fun comic relief into a total powerhouse, being both fast and powerful, and later in the series, his horse armor lights on fucking fire! And this transformation of Umagon is incredibly satisfying to watch as a reader because for 70 chapters, we only knew him as Gash's horse friend, but we're the ones that get to see him struggle to find a partner. and to have that finally pay off is incredibly rewarding to not just Umagon but to the audience as well. And that doesn't mean that Umagon becomes completely humorless. He still has his moments of comedy just like the rest of the cast, but now you have that comedy being perfectly balanced out by the fact that at any time when there's a serious threat, he can transform into a flaming armored horse and kick ass. Now, speaking of comedy, this is one of the most important parts of Gash Bell. But before I go into my thoughts on the series' humor, allow me to say up front that I don't find a lot of comedy in anime to be particularly funny. Anime humor seems to really like its misunderstanding plus comedic violence shtick that just isn't for me. It's purely a matter of taste, and there are some series that I do find really funny. But about the only anime that I've ever really laughed at was Hajime no Ippo, and that's because all the comedy in that series is purely jock comedy of dudes busting each other's balls. So I'm glad to say that Gash Bell is quite refreshingly hilarious. Not all of its jokes are winners, but there's enough good bits in it that you forget about the bad ones. It all comes down to two things: the humor itself and the placement of said humor that elevates its impact. Gash Bell is an absolute master at delivering, well, what I can only describe as stupid humor. It is incredibly juvenile, but not in a gross out kind of way. It's just really, really, really dumb. For example, in Kiyomaru and Gash's first meeting with the enigmatic Professor Riddles, the professor first introduces his majestic 12 to Kiyomaru and tasks him with finding the one who doesn't belong. He lists off each member, with each panel detailing their awesome power. Kiyomaru is stunned, scared that he might have to fight each and every one of them if he fails. Then the professor introduces Big Boing. Her power is that she has huge breasts. I think you can see where Kiyomaru finds his answer. It feels weird having to explain the joke, but this suddenness to Big Boing's introduction, combined with the fact that she wasn't even the last member introduced, the professor just keeps going after that, combined with the scene right after being all of them leaving at once to fight the next day, is just so surreal that you can't help but smile at the utter ridiculousness of the scene. And what makes the scene even more hilarious is the fact that the chapter afterwards is the actual fight itself. And it turns out that the professor is no joke, and is a serious threat to Kiyomaru and Gash. So that entire bit of the Majestic 12 was completely unneeded, but it's just so stupid that you can't really complain. Not all of the comedy is like this. Some of it can be quite subtle. One of my favorite bits comes from Kiyomaru's first encounter with Fulgore. You would think that a Japanese middle school student and an Italian superstar would have no form of communication with one another. But of course, since this is a manga, there's no language barrier of course between the two, and both can understand each other perfectly. That is already kind of funny on its own, but what gets me to smile is the fact that the manga itself points that out, by having a giant bar underneath their panels saying that there is no language discrepancy between the two, and having that be repeated 2 more times. I don't know, that always gets a chuckle out of me. What also works is its placement in the story. There's been a recent change in film to put bathos in every movie, regardless of writers' capabilities of juxtaposing serious scenes with comedy, because Marvel did it and were so successful with it. This change sucks. Not only does it rob dramatic scenes of their weight, but it also signifies that the writer's incapability of balancing humor and seriousness, so they just put both haphazardly together and hope for the best. What's great about Gash Bell's comedy is that it never gets in the way of its serious moments. Quite the opposite, in fact. I think it enhances it. For example, when the group first encounters Unko Tintin, it's a scene that's completely played for laughs. I mean, of course it is. Unko is literally Japanese for poop, and Tintin can be read as penis in some forms of Japanese writing. He asks the group to solve ridiculously simple questions except Kiyomaru, who has to answer an equally ridiculous multiplication problem that Kiyomaru answers in seconds. Which then leaves the last question to fucking Umagon, a horse who can't speak. It's a very funny scene, but it's also very refreshing because a few chapters before that was one of the bloodiest fights in the series involving Kiyomaru, Falgor, Gash, and Kanchome, where the four get battered and beaten to a bloody mess by Keith and Buzorai. Raikou knows when the tone should be humorous and when it's time to be dramatic, but what's most important is that he never lets either side dilute the other. It's a very delicate balancing act, keeping both evenly placed, and deciding when it's time for some fun downtime, and when a serious fight is on the horizon. And boy, how about that action then? The fight scenes in Gash Bell are really something special. Fast, aggressive, but also filled with strategy and nuance. What makes Gash Bell's action so good is three important features: the magic system, the involvement of the humans and the demons, and how a fight ends. The magic system in Gash Bell is very simple, but not bad at all. Spells from demons can only be used if the human partner has enough heart power within them. That means that every spell you see in the series are all performed from within the human partner's own emotions. If a human partner runs out of heart power, then they can't cast any more spells, and in Kiyomaru's case, sometimes they can't even move on their own. That means that demons are just as reliant on humans to help them in fights, and it really shows the connections that the humans make with their demons. Both the demon's physical body, along with the human's mental and emotional strength, are being tested whenever a fight breaks out. But that's not all. All Mon series run into the issue that the monsters or animals are the only ones doing any of the actual fighting and getting hurt, and the only things that the humans really do is shout orders for them while they fight. Pokemon, of course, being a franchise for little kids, tries to never bring this up, with some exceptions mind you, and only very rarely raises the stakes for the possibility of death ever occurring. Digimon, on the other hand, is completely inconsistent in this regard. Sometimes the kids will be fused with their partners, sometimes they are the Digimon and get involved, other times they're basically glorified cheerleaders. This gives a weird sense of stake to the issue where only one half of the series has its main characters in danger. Well, Gash Bell says fuck that and has the humans right in the thick of it with their demon partners. Because the only way to permanently defeat a demon in the series is to burn their book, that means that bookkeepers will actually target other bookkeepers instead of their partner demons. That means humans in this series are just as involved in dodging and withstanding life-threatening attacks from the demons. As a result, the humans in Gash Bell can get fucked up, just as much as their demon partners can, sometimes even more. Even the little kids get hurt in this series. It not only creates an intense layer of drama to these fights, because both the Mon and their partner are in just as much danger, but it also truly makes the demon and human pairings like Gash and Kiyomaru feel like equals, because it's not just Kiyomaru firing spells while Gash does all the fighting and dodging. Kiyomaru has to also get involved and move his ass around the battlefield just as much as Gash does to avoid their book getting burned. It makes you want to root for these guys even more now that both of them are the ones in danger, rather than just one of them, and when they do succeed and win, it feels like they work together as equals, which helps reinforce the themes of camaraderie that the series is all about. Speaking of their books, like I said earlier, when a demon's book is burned, they disappear from the human world. That doesn't mean that they're dead, just gone from the human world, and having returned to the demon world never to return. This concept, whether unknowingly or not, might just be the single most genius concept that Raikou introduced. Handling death can be a very tricky issue, especially in media made towards kids. You don't want your readers bored with a lack of stakes, but you also don't want to go around killing off your entire cast for the sake of creating more tension, especially when a lot of that cast contains kids that look to be no older than 8 years old. Most of the time this is solved by having one or two death scenes that stick with the main characters for the longest time. You want some deaths to show that the characters aren't completely safe, But you also don't want too much, or else your audience stops caring for your characters when they know that they'll likely die soon. By having books be burned and the demons forcibly being returned to the demon world, Raikou is instead creating an offering to the audience. Nobody in Gash Bell dies, but the trade-off is that everyone has to say goodbye to their demon partner at some point. And no better pair exemplifies that drama better than Li Yan and her partner Wan Li. Unlike the majority of the demon and human pairings, these two are the only ones who are explicitly described as lovers thanks to their close age gap. However, there's a heavy tragedy to their pairing, because one day the two will have to say goodbye to one another, whether that be because of Wan Li's book getting burned, to them actually winning and Wan Li having to say goodbye to Li Yan as he must leave the human world to become king. The two understand that they are destined to separate once this is all over. It's both very tragic and beautiful that they still continue to fight, and that kind of heartbreak is very common in Gash Bell. Pretty much everyone in this series cries. At first you might find it a bit ridiculous, but trust me, by the end of the series you'll be crying just as much as the main characters are. Raikou can be an absolute monster at times with some of these goodbye scenes. When you combine all of this together, you get an amazing shonen battle system that combines heart and strategy to create fight scenes that are truly next level. It's amazing to see not only Gash but Kiyomaru get stronger and stronger as the two face increasingly more dangerous enemies and situations and come out on top. So with all that being said, if you're still interested, you might be wondering how you can go about and read the manga. Well, this is where things get really complicated. Unlike in my Yu-Gi-Oh video, where accessing the manga was so readily available and easy to do that I didn't even bring that part up, trying to legally find Gash Bell's manga is a lot more difficult than you think, and in a way kind of unnecessary. Allow me to explain. Gash Bell's manga was published in America under Viz Media. Viz is partially owned by Shogakukan, the company Raikou was working for several years. That was until June 2008, where Raikou filed a lawsuit against Shogakukan after they had lost the original copies of 5 colored art pieces. The suit was settled, with Raikou winning over 2 million yen and the rights to the entire Gash Bell franchise from Shogakukan. But since Shogakukan owned Viz Media and no longer had the rights to the series, the official English volumes was completely halted and was effectively cancelled at volume 25. Now you can't even watch the anime anymore on any major streaming service. That also means that trying to buy the English copies is a waste of time now, since none of the original owners are going to be getting any money out of those copies anymore. You might be wondering why Raikou did all of this. Sure, losing your art sucks no matter who you are, but from the outside it looks like he ruined his own franchise out of petty spite. Well, allow me to explain the context of where Raikou's mindset was. I believe it has been well documented at this point on YouTube and on social media about the relentless grind that is the work schedule of a weekly mangaka artist, especially in the early 2000s. Young, talented artists and writers are worked to the bone, week by week, 18 hours a day with little to no sleep, having to constantly work on their series under the pressure that their series might get cancelled. Passion is exploited and dreams are turned into sleepless labor. The weeks turn into months, which turn into years without breaks or even free time to contact their own family. Manga authors keep going until their bodies start falling apart, and their doctors are literally ordering them to not work, at which point hiatuses occur and their series begin to lose popularity. For Raikou, one such example came from when he accidentally slammed his hand on the desk so hard that it fractured his wrist and was forced into the hospital immediately. According to his doctors, it was a miracle that his hand didn't need to get amputated. said. This was where the anime's rushed original ending that I explained earlier comes from, and combined a disappointing ending to the anime along with Raiku's burnout over writing week to week for over 6 years, and he was justifiably checked out. So after all the years you spent working for your company, sacrificing years of your time, health, and well-being for both your series and your company's profits, when it turns out that your company has lost the art you made for them, it can be easy to see how this can finally push you over the edge. This company that you put your life into can't even uphold the standards you set for yourself when working there. I hope you can see where Raikou was coming from when he decided to sue the company that was publishing his story. You might think that it was a mistake for him to do it, but I see him as him standing up not just for himself, but for all the overworked mangakas in the industry, and judging from the huge amount of support he got, and the fact that Raikou still continued being a mangaka afterwards, I like to think that he was glad that he made that decision. This leaves us to the matter of fan translations, and Gash Bell has 2 complete translations. But unfortunately, neither one of them is all that great to read. The Null translation has the entire series fully translated in English, but has a lot of the typical flaws you see in amateur fan translation attempts. Mainly grammar and spelling mistakes, along with most egregiously, a lot of unnecessary swearing. I think the characters say shit on average about 3 times per chapter. Anime Destiny has only the second half of the series translated, but fixes a lot of the grammar and translation issues in the Null translation. Unfortunately, its issues come down to the writing itself. The dialogue feels, well, very artificial, almost like it was machine translated. Characters talk in a way that feels very stilted and dry, compared to the Null translation, where at least the dialogue is a lot more organic, and you unfortunately end up on a pick your poison type deal. If you want my advice though, and if you're willing to wait, an absolute legend under the name of Zatch Bell Gamer is currently in the middle of working on a retranslation of the entire series, with translations for both that prefer the English localization, along with an original, higher quality translation that is much more faithful to the original manga. The scan quality is massively improved, grammar and spelling issues are non-existent, dialogue feels much more natural and in character, and the whole translation feels very professional and well made. In fact, it's what I've been using when showing stills from the early parts of the series. It's currently ongoing and only has the first 4 volumes of the series translated, but if you're willing to wait, then I highly encourage you to read this translation of the series over the other 2, and for you to give them your full support. Now, Gash Bell is a series that's not without its flaws, specifically the final act of the series and its main villain. For most of the series, Gash Bell does a good job at building and foreshadowing each of its main villains and their roles, whether that be Zophis being introduced to the audience a good 30 or so chapters before he takes center stage as the main villain, to the long and highly anticipated meeting between Gash and Zeon Bell. But the last arc in the series throws that idea completely out the window with the introduction of Clear Note, an obscenely powerful demon who shows up out of nowhere and has never been mentioned before up until this point. His goals are generic, his backstory is only lightly touched upon, and his only role in the story is to basically have an overwhelmingly powerful foe for the main characters to fight at the end. I feel like even Raikou is aware of how out of nowhere Clear was, because in one of the supplemental shorts released years after the manga had concluded, we get to see a hypothetical meeting between Zeon and Clear, with Zeon wondering how the hell Clear managed to avoid Zeon's notice, and Clear giving a much more detailed look into his past. But at the end of the day, these flaws are only minor compared to the monumentally good things Gash Bell does well. What makes Gash Bell such a strong story is its ability to tell multiple meaningful journeys of the battle to see who can become Demon King. While our main focus is on Kiyomaru and Gash, Raikou is able to showcase multiple demon and human pairings at once that you want to see succeed, and for them to have to leave the story after their books have been burned will absolutely break your heart. And I think there's no better way to convey how amazingly well written these stories are than to tell you the story of my favorite demon and human pairing. Here is a timestamp in case you don't want to hear spoilers of a character's entire arc. Vincent Barry is bored. He's an aggressive and very powerful demon with a love of fighting, but so far he and his human partner Gustav have only been encountering weak demons, and it's pissing Barry off. That's when Gustav brings up the idea of heading to Japan and fighting Gash Bell, with the rumors being that any demon who tries to go after Gash never coming back. When Barry and Gash finally fight, it's a brutal clash of skill, power, and ultimately wills. The only thing that Barry believes in is strength. The strength to overcome any obstacle set in your way and to enforce your will onto others. Gash believes in kindness. The kindness that is in his own heart, and on the promise of a fallen friend to become a kind king. At the end, to the shock of everyone, Barry comes out on top. However, Barry can't seem to hit Gash. Despite having lost, something in Gash's eyes make him the stronger opponent over Barry. This both frustrates, but also inspires Barry. He calls off on burning Gash's book, but swears it the next time they fight, where Barry promises to be even stronger. Barry then disappears from the story for over 100 chapters, even refusing to fight the powerful Millennium Demons because he knows Gash will be there and wants to keep that promise of fighting him again. That is until chapter 236, where Barry makes his return. At first, everyone is unsure of what to make of Barry. Is he their ally or an enemy? But upon a further look, Gash notices that everything about Barry has changed. He's covered in scars, one of his horns is gone, and his attitude and demeanor are no longer that of a punk looking for a fight. Barry goes ahead and fights Keith, his old rival back in the demon world, and Keith is no joke, by the way. He's the one responsible for nearly beating Gash and Kiyomaru earlier in the arc. He tanked and survived an enhanced Bao Zakeruga, Gash's strongest spell, and now his body and mind have been corrupted to increase his power even further. He should be a serious threat despite his odd quirks, which is why it's all the more shocking when Barry annihilates him. We learned that Barry had previously fought Elzador, a gigantic dragon and one of the 4 favorites to win the entire fight to become king. The fight shook Barry to his very core. It made him reevaluate his endless pursuit of strength and power just for the sake of it. And it made him feel for the first time what fighting for his own life, for his own future was really like. When Barry defeated Elzador, the dragon simply congratulated Barry on a well-fought battle. And this single act ultimately humbled him. Barry now realized what true strength was. It wasn't about domination, but growth. The ability to improve yourself even further than you already have, and to climb higher and higher without looking down on anyone else. The answer to how Barry beat Keith was simple. Barry changed for the better while Keith grew to be even worse. But Keith had one more trick up his sleeve, a death trap that would force one of the demons into burning their own books so that the rest can survive. Gash offers to sacrifice himself for the group to stop Fado until Barry intervenes. When Gash asks why Barry is doing this for him despite being Gash's rival, Barry immediately strikes Gash out of the way and out of the death trap. Faced with no other options, Gustav is forced into letting Barry's book get burned so that Barry doesn't die. Barry laments how he won't be able to achieve his promise and become king. However, Gustav claims that Barry has accomplished an even greater goal by smacking away Gash, who earlier had eyes that scared even Barry. Barry has become someone even stronger than a king. He's become a figure who can strike the king when the king is making a mistake. And that ends the story of Barry and Gustav. And you know what's the best part about all of this? There are dozens of stories like this in Gash Bell. Stories of questioning oneself, improvement, resolve, pain, and ultimately sacrifice. Even if you can't find a connection to Barry's story, I guarantee you that you will find one that will resonate with you on a personal level, because that is what makes the story of Gash Bell so beautiful. These stories of pain and triumph are what make Gash Bell into such an amazing story. A story of camaraderie, heartbreak, and ultimately, kindness. Oh, and one last thing before I go. There's a fucking sequel! Konjiki no Gash 2 launched over a year ago and is currently ongoing with 2 volumes already out. I'm not even gonna try and be analytical here. Gash Bell 2 is fucking amazing. Everything you want out of a sequel is here. The stakes have been raised even further. Now the kitty gloves are off. People just straight up die in the sequel. The characters are back, but now all grown up. And yes, Falgor still does his stupid dance, and it is just as glorious as ever. It is thankfully released monthly, which means Raikou and his team are allowed much more time to work on the art and story, while also having much more freedom to have actual lives. While the story is still in its early stages, the writing and art so far have been phenomenal. The first Gash Bell's art isn't bad, it's actually quite good with some very good use of inking, but you can tell that it was Raikou's first series, and the art can sometimes feel a bit generic and plain looking. Well, 15 years after drawing the series, and Jesus! The art looks fucking amazing! I won't go into too much details regarding the story, but it's everything you want out of a Gash Bell sequel, and I cannot wait to talk more about it when it finally concludes. Even if it takes 10 years to finish, quality sequels like these that respect the original while also forging its own exciting path are a rare breed. So what the hell are you waiting for? Why not take the dive in and enter the goofy, intense, heartbreaking, and most of all, wonderful world of Gash Bell?
You know who's got the power?